kind of a bit of a snapshot overview of the market that we see it. So I'll just run through a bit of a high-level presentation. There's a fair bit of detail, and Dee, I think you got some questions at the end from people as well. So it's an interesting time. Everyone is busy, so we know it's kind of pretty normal for a lot. So across a lot of industries, Seek are reporting that it's, I think it's even the latest has changed again. So it's gone from the busiest in 23 years to I think even more. I think it's more like 30 now. So we've starting to find that there's a bit of a labour shortage across most sectors now. So it's, I think driven by hospitality is probably one of the most obvious that we see in the media, but it's really kind of across the board with most industries. So it's kind of, this is probably not news to anyone. We're certainly seeing that it's, affecting a lot of people across, even tradies, etc. as well. So that's pretty kind of high level at this point. And the big one that's going to be the pain point is tourism and hospitality. That's certainly hitting across all the states, I believe. So, but what that then, the knock-on effect of that is other things like orchards, where they're needing fruit pickers, all that kind of thing. So it's really kind of across the board, not just at, I guess, labour hire level, but it's actually across different professions and white collar as well. So, we're just seeing that there's just skilled, whether you're highly skilled or semi-skilled or just backpacking, it's kind of across the board. So it's really quite interesting time. So it's not only in our sector, but it's across everywhere. So that's kind of a bit of a high level overview. So what got us here? A lot of it is, we're just, I guess the border closures is certainly a kind of an obvious one, where they're just not allowed a lot of the labour forces into within different states, but also internationally. So there's a lot of workers that have returned home. So what we would normally have backpackers and I guess a migrant or sponsored workforce, a lot of them have returned to their home countries. But also even within the state, so moving between Queensland, WA, New South Wales, Victoria, there's just been none of that as well. So there's been a lot of fishing within the same state, which has just caused, I guess, a lot of complexity in terms of, no one being able to have that transient nature between states. And then there's been, this is kind of more candidate centric. So there's been a less of a sense of urgency for people to look for new jobs as well. So a lot of that's been fed by lockdowns, and especially in New South Wales and Victoria. So, there's been a lack of that, where people were probably a bit more, I don't want to move just yet because I want to wait and see. And that's kind of starting to relax a little bit now, but as we get closer to Christmas, it's people are going to wait until, I guess, the new year, given that they want a holiday. So, which leads me into the next one, the Great Resignation. There's been a lot of, I guess, media coverage about what this is. So it's really coming out of the US, what they've coined the phrase, the Great Resignation, which is people coming out of the pandemic over there, looking for a bit of a sea change from their current jobs. So, it's kind of a phenomenon that's hit over there, and a little, to a lesser extent, the UK as well. But we're kind of wondering, are we going to see this in Australia? So there's a bit of a question mark. I guess to some degree, yes, because it's been fed by work patterns, working from home, realisation on what people want in terms of flexible work arrangements. I've noticed that even in the media in the last couple of days, there's wage conditions and a drive for pay reviews, etc. as well is starting to fuel some of that as well. Again, lots of different opinions going on, but certainly people are wanting to have a long Christmas break. I'm one for sure, and for one of those that just kind of need a bit of a break and reflect. So people will probably have a think about that and what does that mean for their jobs in the new year. So there'll be a lot of reflection and probably people coming into the market to look for a change. However, we're also saying that 2022 is probably going to be the year of counter offers. So what we mean by that, and we've got a little bit more about that, is people go to resign. People know it's difficult to replace people. So it'll be all about counter offers being made for, especially for good workers to remain in the business. So there's probably going to be probably an increase in counter offer activity as well. For Great Resignation, what does that mean for employers? Well, I've certainly been reading a bit more about advising people to engage with maybe a bit of a review before Christmas rather than after. So kind of reflect on the year that has been, which has been quite difficult and problematic for a lot of people. But there's certainly probably a lot more encouragement to do an end of calendar year review, just so that people can, I guess, go into their break with a bit of a reflection on what the year was and what the year ahead could look like. But also, the reasons for people probably resigning is workload, which I know everyone's busy. We're all busy and we're all in that kind of situation. But there's been a feeling that people have had to work harder than before, and the days are longer. It's a lot more bespoke in terms of workflows, etc. No team building activities, and then kind of a common no pay rise. So there's been a lot of reflection on people having had a pay increase for a couple of years, etc. as well. So but that's through businesses doing cost reductions, etc. because of COVID as well, and that doesn't sit well with some people. So kind of obvious stuff there. Salary bandings, this is kind of a common, there's a lot of pressure for an expectation on people to do quite a lot of work in their roles, and their roles have broadened over time. So their remit has got broader, and their probably pay hasn't reflected that. So as people maybe have left, they haven't been replaced, and that's added to, I guess, some people's skill sets and work responsibilities. This one is the reward performance. So if there's bonuses, great. We know that bonuses haven't been common through COVID, but if there's an opportunity to reward good performance or going above and beyond, there's certainly an opportunity to maybe acknowledge some of that hard work from a retention strategy point of view. And psychologically, it's very powerful to be, got, I guess, a pat on the back, however that recognition is. And then for employers, if you have to counter offer, then basically you're probably on the back foot that workers are looking and probably ready to leave and have been exploring options. So again, it goes back to what I was saying before, maybe some reviews this side of Christmas, maybe a bit more of a positive thing to do now rather than later. So for candidates and employees, I guess if you're dissatisfied, go and talk to your manager or your employer. I think there's a bit of a hesitancy that people used to think that if they bring it up, they'd get fired, and that's certainly not the case. So if you're resigning and getting counter offered to stay, then why have you left that process to, I guess, approach that topic? So if you're feeling dissatisfied, or I guess things have changed, or you're tired, etc., you need to I guess, have that conversation and career conversation internally before you go external. So I'd encourage anyone to have that conversation up front if they feel comfortable to do so, because you might as well put that time and effort into your current employer and give them the opportunity to do so. And then I guess from a recruiter point of view, if you're going for a process and get offered and then you get counter offer and decline, etc., it's from a recruiter point of view, it's quite hard, and even from a hiring manager, if you go silent on people. All I can ask is, if you're in that position where you've got maybe multiple offers on, or lots of things going on the go, or counter offers, just be honest. I don't need to know the detail, but I think people do appreciate some clarity on where you're sitting, and if you've got a couple other things on the go as well. So that's just a nice little addition from me as a wish list thing to put in there. So this is kind of a bit of a kind of high level snapshot of the market, what's going on more broadly. So just beyond, I guess, just the day-to-day things. So look, talent acquisition for highly skilled roles, where it was a strong reliance and I guess on migrant workers. So IT is a classic example of this. So that's, they're still struggling to get, I guess, highly skilled or specific skill set workers where they're no longer in the country. So those that are in the country are highly sought after or are quite happy where they are. So there's a lot of that going on at the moment. Retaining key people in your business when the market is buoyant, that is challenging. So a retention strategy from that point of view, keeping people engaged. Leveling up the employee value proposition to be competitive. I think this is where a lot of businesses are a bit jaded on this and probably need to focus on this. I've got a little bit more information further on. Organisational fatigue. There's there's been a lot of change in a lot of time, so people are a bit tired and jaded on all of that as well. So, next year is probably going to continue to have lots of things going on, so people are just tired. So you need to be mindful of that. Communicating with honesty and authenticity. So this is just being clear with, I guess, with maybe some communication coming out of the organisation with what's going on. Some people feel like they don't know what's happening in their businesses, and that's a common, I guess, commentary that we often hear from people as well. And then just rethinking the culture. So that's things like, it goes back to the employee value proposition. So life cycle. So from the moment you bring people in, during, and potentially even if they're exiting the business. So that's more of an HR thing, but something that I believe people should be always aware of. Post-COVID, I think businesses will restructure. It's kind of feel like that's probably going to be a bit of the norm over the next year or two. So kind of obvious reasons with business operating. There's going to be a strong need for business partnering. So this is a common thing in HR and safety now, where people do recruit that skill set, and I think that's going to be needed more so. So there's going to be a lot more pressure on people within those functions to have strong business partnering skills, because that's what's kind of needed moving forward. Equally, there's been some where teams have just been under pressure for a long time, and I've been the go-to person for months and months and months. So I guess there's a lot of review on what that's going to look like moving forward as well. So this is just changing tack a little bit. What's happening with recruiting? Lots of access to talent, what we're talking about. There's a real focus on business partnering skills. So that's kind of that front and center. Online interviewing, I think everyone's kind of been exposed to that over recent months. So remember, some people have had their whole experience is online interviewing and not actually doing any face-to-face time on site. So that can be challenging in itself. And I have placed people in roles that have been fully recruited and worked first few months all from home. So that's quite a challenge for when people start to return to actual offices and know that they've been remote the whole time. What that's also led to is some challenging in getting a real true assessment of people's capabilities. So it's all been online rather than face to face. So the fit with some people is kind of harder to assess online rather than on in person. And then onboarding challenges, so getting people started in roles, all from online has been challenging for some organisations as well. So, but that's ongoing, so it's still happening to this day. This is just a quick overview of changing tack again with what's happening in the HSE market. So there's certainly a big increase in the number of roles, and we're seeing that across the board, across the country. I guess it's a bit of a pyramid. The high demand roles are advisors, and the entry level, there's a lot going on there, through to next level up managers, and then probably the pointy end is less opportunities, but it's certainly starting to pick up. From a state perspective, Victoria's been the busiest. Not sure if that's lockdown associated or not, but closely behind that has been New South Wales. But again, a lot of that activity has been at the advisor to junior manager end. And I guess this then goes back to what we're saying. It's been hard for organisations to interview and do the fit type assessment as well. And equally, people haven't been looking in these states as well. So there's been a high number of advertised positions in this space as well. So there's been a lot going on. Manufacturing and supply chain, probably more supply chain, has been the big growth sector. So it's things like parcel delivery, so Australia Post and the logistics organisations, Woolworths, Coles, etc. So they've all been busy. Right, deep breath. Almost there. So what does this all mean to you? Well, we're still in uncharted times, so we're in a bit of a bounce back. We're still adjusting to what that new norm will be. Businesses will continue to change, so there'll be a drive for still specialist roles. There'll be cost drivers to look for efficiencies and savings. That's always been around. Probably be the same in moving forward. And I think this is a big one. The employee value proposition is important in attracting people and retaining staff. So I think organisations need to understand what that is to attract the right people and retain the right people in their organisation. So as a candidate, people want to know that. What's in it for me? What's that organisation like? So that's going to be quite important, and I guess in the coming months as well. Also, recruiting's taking a lot longer. It's because there's less candidates around. It's I guess it's a bit of a different dynamic out there at the moment. So people are not overly active in the market, or they're looking for job security, or people are exhausted, whatever. There's multiple reasons that time is taking a lot longer time. And I think that will continue probably for the next few months. It'll be interesting to see what it looks like in 6 months' time. I have no idea. As I said before, there's a rise in counter offers going on where people are dropping out of process mid-process, and we're not sure why we don't hear and we get ghosted. So, there's a lot of people going silent mid-process, which kind of is a bit of what's going on in the market. And also the broader thing, the labour market has been pretty fragmented. And again, this is kind of just, it's a bit all over the place at the moment, and we don't have a strong crystal ball on what's going. So I think that will continue into the months ahead as well. This is kind of what's been happening. We're suddenly starting to see long recruitment processes, so a lot more people getting involved. So there are instances where people have been interviewed 3, 4, 5 times in a process because online interviewing. So that makes it complex for people, and that can disengage people as well. So there's a lot more people involved in the decision making. So I think that's kind of drifted with some businesses where there's a lot of meeting of a lot of people. So that's starting to get a little bit over engineered. So, but equally that can be a positive experience because people feel like they've met all the stakeholders involved as well. But I think there's a fine balance between the two because it can be overcooked. And then again, the employer value proposition is going to be more important than ever to attract the talent. And then the last bit, onboarding new hires. I think hybrid working certainly made it more complex because there's less face-to-face stuff, and but equally, if that's not done right, it can disengage people very quick, so they don't feel like they've been introduced to the organisation well. So again, it's a bit of a trade-off. So I guess with some of the interactions I've had with presenting at TAFE, they said, some of that's gone very, very well, and some people have felt very engaged with the business and felt like they've had a great run-in. But equally, some people, it's gone very poorly, and some people felt like they've not been part of the organisation, they haven't got a lot of information, they haven't been introduced correctly, they haven't been given the right IT platforms. So, while remote working has become part of the norm, it's also complex for a new worker to start the organisation. So if it's not done well, it can actually be quite a bad experience for someone, and they can disengage very quick. So, if you're the new person starting, or if you're the employee manager, just kind of reframe what that all looks like and how that needs to be. Every business is different. I understand that, but it's also needs to be quite applicable to the candidate starting, so they get a positive start. But if you're the candidate as well, you need to give feedback that if you feel like that you're not engaged properly or you're not getting the right information, that information needs to go back to people quite quickly so that they can adjust. And that's us as a quick, lots of detail I know, but kind of a bit of a high level overview anyway. So I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Steve. That's great. So I've just got a couple of questions, and if anyone's got any questions, feel free to jump in as well, because obviously, that's one of the main aims of this session, as well as for Steve to share with us that insight of what's happening. And it's certainly what I'm hearing from clients that I'm talking to as well, and companies that I'm working with, that recruitment has been a big challenge this year and moving into next year as well. So if you've got any questions, feel free to jump in. One of the questions that I have here from someone who couldn't come was, they're struggling, they're actually offering roles, and then people, as you said, are signing up for it and then they're pulling out. So they're asking that, are you seeing companies offer sign-on bonuses, or is there anything that you can do to keep those people sort of engaged or get them to come over? Or do you think it's more around candidates using it as leverage to go back to their current employer?
All of the above.
Do you want me to answer that, Steve?
Yeah, Katie, yeah.
I'll give Steve a break and he can have a sip of water.
Thanks, Katie.
I think for the most part, Dee, I think, in general, most people aren't doing it to get a counter offer. And I think anyone we engage with, it's more you know, giving them advice in terms of, look, don't let it get to that point. If you're unhappy, if you're wanting a move for whatever reason, go and have that conversation with your boss before going out to market. I think the big thing is, look, I don't think from what we've seen, and Steve, I'm sure you'll agree with me, there isn't a huge amount in terms of sign-on bonuses. Look, there might be at the more senior exec end of the market. I've heard of a couple, but not so much, you know, across the advisor, business partner, manager level, to be honest. I think Steve touched on it before. The biggest two reasons I would say that they're not converting to acceptance of an offer is either the process has moved way too slow and therefore they've accepted another offer elsewhere, which I would say is probably the majority, or they've just not been 100% comfortable with making a move out their current organisation. But I'd probably say it's the former. I think it's the process that people have to go through, or an under offer in terms of package and salary has been a bit of an issue sometimes, but usually it's the time that they engage in a process through to receiving a contract. And if you've got somebody who's good and has the right talent that's in demand, then these people are getting multiple offers. We see it every single day. So the advice we're giving to our clients and our community that we're working with is, if you see somebody, don't turn around and go, well, I'll see another 2 or 3 to benchmark and I'll wait, because by that point they've gone.
Yeah.
So there, and I can name, you know, heaps of examples from recently where they interview somebody and they're like, oh my God, they're absolutely great. Let's go to psych testing. Let's go to medical. Let's go to offer. And it literally moves that quickly. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
But I think and probably the other one is, even when the offer's accepted and when they start, that can actually be an important period that they need to keep engaged and stay communicated with, because if they're working out a notice period and another role that they were interviewing for might suddenly come back and go, look, would you reconsider? It's still an at-risk period before they start, even though they may have accepted. So you've got to keep the communication up with people before they even start to stay committed, because I think that can be a lull period where if they, you know, there's a perception that, oh, it's fine, they've signed and they'll be here in 3 weeks' time. And if you don't speak to them before, you know, 2 days before they're due to start, then that's an at-risk period as well. So
yeah.
I think you've got to
and I think that's a really good point. Yeah, it's that communication, isn't, and keeping that engagement up as well. Another question that I had just come through as well is around flexibility, working from home, remotely, regional, all of those kind of things. I guess we're seeing a lot of people have obviously are leaving the cities as well and moving out to regional areas because during COVID they've been able to work from home. Are you getting any sense of what that might be like and what organisations will be looking at doing next year? Because if someone's moved and they're expected to come back and work in the office, they'll potentially leave and look for something else. So anything happening in that space?
Katie?
Yeah, I think every single person we speak to wants that degree of flexibility. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, is it a bit too soon to answer? Possibly, because I think most businesses are still working from home. There's not a huge push to get everybody back to the office from what we've seen by a certain date or anything. So I think that might have more of an impact as we go into next year. But every single person we speak to and interview is there flexibility to work from home? How often am I expected to go into the office, et cetera, et cetera? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So has anyone got very creative with any things that you're seeing? People are asking me as well as, you know, what does flexibility mean? Obviously there is that working from home, going into the office, but are you seeing any other things that can potentially also attract people to their organisation? If that makes sense.
I think it's a part of it. Well, it depends on what the organisation does. So you know, if it's very operational and you've got site and there's expectation that, you know, there's, I guess, like a blue collar workforce that is actually on site, etc. It's harder for maybe some of those organisations to give some of those, I guess, what's perceived as more nice to haves. So, whereas if it's a bit more white collar environment or professional, etc., that remote working is a lot more easier to give. I think the ones that, you know, if it's a site-based role, you know, how much flexibility are you going to have? But when you know that probably traditionally it was a safety person or HR person was on site 5 days a week, and that's kind of the nature of the work, because the work, you know, 200-person workforce is there. So the creativeness of how do you kind of weigh up to give some flexibility. I think a lot of people probably still enjoy the flexible working hours and the flexible hybrid model. So while, you know, they might need you to be there 3 or 4 days a week, maybe there's flexibility to do a split day or flexi hours or something like that. So, because I think it's harder for some of those traditional sites where you do actually need present, you know, someone present and in, you know, in the line of sight, because if they need to be in front of operators and do some teaching or some investigations or inspection work with people, it's hard to do that remotely on a mobile phone, isn't it? So
absolutely.
So I think it's really driven around the mode of what the business does. So so it's probably going to be harder for those traditional businesses to be more creative about and attracting people in. So, and it's probably challenging them to think outside of the box what's been some of those traditional operational needs as well. And that comes back to employee value proposition, as I was saying in the presentation. It's like, you know, it's probably something that businesses are going to have a think about as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it is. It's making a lot of organisations think. And one of the things I'm hearing from safety professionals as well now is, you know, they're very much looking for organisations that fit with their values. And that whole culture fit values is a very strong thing for them now. Whereas, you know, 18 months ago, we probably saw it was more around the dollars. Now it's people are quite happy to take a step back in terms of the salary, but they really want those values to be aligned, and they really want that cultural fit as well. So assume you guys are seeing the same thing with that.
Yeah. It's and a lot of that comes back to those business partnering skills as well, because it's about being able to, are they effective in their job? You know, can they influence? Can they do the job? Can they change behaviours as well? So it's there's a lot of moving parts now, and it's got more complex as well. So
and that's probably a good segue.
So I'm sorry. No, I was going to say I've had quite a few conversations recently where, you know, people in senior exec level roles are kind of like, I want to do a completely different industry, but probably work for an industry that is more purpose-led rather than commercially driven, and give back to, you know, whether it might be a not-for-profit organisation or aged care facilities or healthcare or, you know, all these things. That's a big topic of conversation, and certainly has been since the pandemic, is, like you said, it's more that values alignment, and also giving back to the general community rather than just the bottom dollar for a large corporate organisation. Yeah,
absolutely. I think so. And, you know, I think we will see more of that. I think one of the things I've seen in COVID as well is a lot of people have gone back to living a much simpler life, and the things that are important to them now are completely different to what it was, you know, before COVID, when we're all so crazy busy. So I think that will definitely be an interesting space to watch over the next sort of 12 months as well. I have a question here from a safety professional. What skills do you see as being critical for safety professionals to have moving forwards?
I think for me, I get hung up on, because I guess a lot of the common patterns is the business partnering skills and being effective in your job. I think it's fine being a subject matter expert and having a toolbox of great technical skills, But if you can't translate that and out into operations or out into the workforce, then that's you're going to get left behind, I think. So the profession is about getting people to own their own safety rather than you doing it for them or giving them the framework. It's about influencing that. So I think what I often encourage people to do if they haven't got it is go do a training and assessment Cert 4. And because I think that gives you the skill set to be able to better influence you as a subject matter expert to be able to be more effective in influencing others around you. So I think I still see that as a key way forward for a lot of people. So that's my viewpoint anyway.
Yeah, no, that's great. And another one, would you recommend safety professionals doing rotations into operational roles to get more experience in the business? Interesting question. Great question. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a great question.
Depends on the organisation. I think it's great. Certainly, it might be, if there's opportunity to do so, absolutely. I mean, a lot of operational roles can be a lot more commercial, so it might push safety professionals slightly out of their comfort zone. And you know, and one of the interesting things that I learned as a recruiter, when you put a lot of safety people through psychometric testing, as a whole, and it's very generic, stereotypic, numeracy skills are not as high as the other skill set. So, and in operational roles, there's sometimes some of those roles have numeracy and commercial skills are needed and are quite strong. So, it really depends on the scope of the role and the business, but it might actually push a few discomfort buttons for some safety people. So yeah, it's just something to be aware of. Katie?
No, I agree, absolutely. But that's the conversation we have a lot with clients is, they need to be able to understand the operations of the organisation and really relate to those individuals to get buy-in. And I think that's why, a lot of people that, go into safety come off the tools and all that sort of stuff. And, there are many examples I can think of in high-risk industries where, you might be in the electricity industry, for example, and an ex-electrician or something like that is always actually really highly valued because they can have the right level of conversation with people who are their key stakeholders, essentially.
Yeah. Katie, I've got a question for you. How do you counter-offer the counter-offers?
Oh, you're asking me?
Right. Yeah. I've been messaged it.
How do you counter?
How do you counter?
Great question.
Very good question. Look, I think for me, and in my experience over the last 20 years, that conversation's got to start at the beginning of the process when people are approaching us to look for another opportunity. And, we talk about a counter offer generally in our industry, Steve, in terms of dollars. But I think it's now gone so much further beyond that an extra 10, 15 grand or whatever it might be in your back pocket. I say to people, when you actually work that out and you take off your tax that you've got to give the lovely ATO, etc. I mean, you're talking about a cup of coffee a month, probably in some instances. So it's taking that person back to that original conversation of why do you want to move in the first place? And if it is things that the business can do around career progression, et cetera, give them the opportunity to do that before you go external in the market. However, there are instances where there are restructures and people don't like their new direct manager or their boss, or they don't like the culture of the organisation. So those are the things that are very unlikely to change if you were to stay within a business. But look, I mean, we've probably all been there at some point or another where when you go to resign and somebody begs you to stay, it's actually a really nice feeling because you suddenly feel very, very valued. So I think it's not about me counter-offering a counter-offer or a business countering a counter-offer. I think it's the individual themselves realising and reminding themselves why they started looking in the first place. And if it's dollars, don't bother start looking, have that conversation straight up. If it's about career progression, if there is something a business can do to retain you and keep you motivated and keep you interested, have that conversation before you do anything externally. If it's stuff that can't be changed, then I don't understand why a counter offer would really kind of come into play. And it doesn't a lot of the time. Yeah.
And I'm with you. And it's probably what I said before. I mean, it's, you know, and I put in the slide is that it's about encouraging people to do the reviews before Christmas as well, and have those conversations and actually go, and maybe actually having some early interaction so you know what's going on. So if it's you as a candidate, then be vocal about, you know, that you're no longer happy or things have changed. But if you're a manager and you want to retain your good team, then you need to be having those conversations of how you're going, how you're feeling. So,
and that's a really good point. And I think to Katie, you mentioned about feeling valued as well. Like, you know, when someone comes back with it and begs you to stay, you feel valued. I think that's a really important thing, because for employers as well, it's how can we make sure that our people do feel valued as well, and don't even get to that point where they start looking elsewhere as well. I think sometimes we can take that for granted too. So I've just had another question messaged to me as well, similar lines, but what do you do, or how do you manage it when you're an internal candidate who's been successful in a role, but they're offering more money to external candidates, but because you're the preferred candidate and you're internal, you don't get the same money as the external candidates?
Oh,
challenging one, difficult. Yeah.
If it was me personally, I'd push back, because I mean, why is your worth less than somebody else's? I mean, look, until you know the ins and outs of a specific example, it's very difficult. But I think in reality, you know, if my role is worth X externally within the market and it's worth Y internally within our organisation, then there's clearly a disparity. And that is something I personally would push back on if you've got the right skill set. I mean, I think where we tend to see more internal candidates get an opportunity over an external candidate is because they want to give that employee a step up, an opportunity to prove themselves within that role and career progression. So that's the only kind of, in the back of my mind, I think, you know, you might have an opportunity where it is a step up, and comparatively externally in the market, somebody who's already there might be on 10, 15 grand more than you, but you're given that opportunity to do it. So if there is, my advice would be to somebody externally is, if that is the case, I'd be asking for a salary review within 6 months. Let me prove myself, let me step up to the plate, let me demonstrate the ability to do this role with your support and coaching and mentoring, but let's review my salary in line with external market conditions after my probation period or within 6 months. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree, because that's what I think that's what I had in that slide, is that some people feel like they can't speak up as well, and you know, for fear of maybe being sacked, or you know, it's kind of an old school kind of mentality. But I think if you don't vocalize and in a constructive way rather than complain, you put it in a constructive and put some thought and structure behind your reasoning, then you know, you're putting basically a business case forward to review and put your value in the role. So, so I think sometimes it's about people just actually thinking about it and being a bit more constructive about what they can add value to, and what that value means in terms of pay and recognition and all that kind of thing. So, yeah. Again, it's probably opening up the lines of communication to have those discussions. Yeah. So that's what it comes down to. And
absolutely, I think it does. It comes down to that communication as well, and just being really clear on that too. And I think really good advice is, you know, don't just spit the dummy and whinge and complain. Actually, sit down, consider it, put some thought to it, and then go back with, sort of something constructive as well. And why are you adding value, and why should you get that as well? So that's great. Last one I've got here as well is it worthwhile investing in having someone update your resume and LinkedIn profile for you when you're looking for a role?
No.
No.
I'm a big believer in the best person that can talk about you is yourself.
Yeah.
So, and on the whole, and look, it's always a personal preference. So it's up to you really. But I always say, when you write about yourself or go to an interview, the only person that you can talk about well is yourself. And because you've lived your skills and experiences, so that should be captured by you in a resume. And it's interesting the number of times because I, as a recruiter, actually give feedback to a lot of people in their resume. So if you want feedback on your resume, I'm quite happy to do it. It's something I have learned over time, and I've still to this day the number of people that say, "Oh, no one's ever told me that." Like, people actually don't give feedback on resumes. So it's only a personal preference. So it's not, and I respect that people sometimes want that service and they want that done for them. I understand. But on the whole, the number of times that I've pulled apart a resume and gone, "Look, you need to rewrite it," and then they go, "I actually paid for that." So different people, different strokes, I understand, but on the whole, I'm not a big fan of it. I think write about yourself in your own words.
Yeah. And I have to agree. I know it's a personal thing, but I actually had someone do mine as well. And I looked at it and just went, that's not me. So when I read it back, my LinkedIn profile, it wasn't me. And my thought was, anyone who knows me would look at that and say, that's not you. So for me, it was, I went back to the one that I'd done as well. But I think, very much a personal approach.
Katie, what do you think?
Yeah.
I think there is some value to a certain extent if you've got somebody who has worked in the same business for 20, 30, 40 years and never written a resume and don't know where to start and doesn't even know what a LinkedIn profile looks like. I think there can be some value. And I've definitely had that experience. And I've come across candidates and clients that haven't even got a LinkedIn profile, which, for us nowadays is the norm. It's our biggest platform for communication. But I actually agree with both of you in terms of they can become too cookie cutter to a certain extent. It becomes very professional where your personality doesn't come through. And what I was just going to tag on and say was exactly what you said, Steve. Write a resume yourself, try your best. You can find information on Google with templates and things like that. And the same with your LinkedIn profile. But you're best getting somebody to give you some honest feedback. And Steve and I do it all the time, and we're always available to do that. Where I was talking to somebody the other week and they had these companies listed, and they're companies I might be aware of, but they're not your big ASX listed companies. So you need a description of what that organization does and how many employees and blah, blah, blah. And because, ABC Pty Limited, what on earth do they do? But we know what Woolies do or Coles. So you've got to think of the audience who is going to look at your resume, and it's not always going to be your first direct line manager who you're going to end up working for. It could be somebody sat in talent acquisition. It could be somebody sat in HR. It could be an operations manager. So I think you need a device of looking through it from different lenses and not using too much jargon or acronyms or this, that, and the other. So Steve and I are always happy to look at people's resumes or LinkedIn profiles and give constructive feedback. So I'm a bit kind of between the two. I sway more towards your opinions, but I do think there is a bit of an audience for people who have been made redundant after a restructure, never had to write a resume, and they just don't know where to start.
That's a fair point.
Good.
Yeah,
good point.
And probably just one of my little pet hates that I'm not a big fan of is when someone speaks about themselves in first person. And, sorry, Steve did this, Steve did that. It's kind of like, yeah, it's gonna, yeah, but it's the reader, I guess. So it's personal preference. As Katie said, there's lots of examples on Google as well. So
yeah, there is. Yep. And that brings me another question that's just popped up as well is what is your view on photos on resumes?
Oh,
I didn't realise people still do that. I know it went through a few years ago, people were doing it, but then it kind of,
photos are good on LinkedIn, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably less so on, and maybe it's just, but I think people, I think LinkedIn's probably a better platform for that rather than a resume, but your resume probably reflects what's on LinkedIn anyway. So
yeah,
I don't know, maybe traditionally no photo on resumes, but it's a preference thing. I'm not a fan.
No, I'm not either. But anyway, all good. That's all the questions that I've got popped through, but thank you so much for that. I think it was a great conversation. I know obviously a lot of people couldn't make it that registered, but we'll send out the recording to them and let them know that they can reach out to you if you've got any questions as well. I think the questions that we had were obviously some really good questions as well. So thanks to everyone who sent those in for us as well. But thank you both so much for your time.